and, of course, your financial partnership. All right, great to have you here tonight. This is the gray envelope I was talking about. It's on that Riverview table, the center table in the back there. And then, of course, we're trying to raise $150,000 in calendar year 2020 in addition to that to pay for the Bible conference, the 8-day conference. So anything that's put in a white envelope or in any of these receptacles or checks written to Cedar Falls Bible Conference will go to our $150,000 2020 8-day conference goal. And the remainder, if you put it in a gray envelope, will go towards some of these projects to upgrade our facilities. So I know we're hitting you with that pretty hard. We'd usually pass offering plates. Everyone would feel guilty, and we'd already have met our goal. But since we're not passing offering plates, we just got a hammer on this. And so people cough up the resources that they've been blessed with by God, which are God's resources to begin with. Amen? Amen. All right. So this is a little creepy. But Christy told me that she was going to wear high heels, and then she saw what I was wearing, and she decided to wear some sneakers. So I'm getting a lot of flack back there for wearing flip-flops. J. Warner Wallace said, Matt, you're looking great on the top. He's like, but what's going on with these flip-flops down here? So anyway, sorry that she gets to be more comfortable tonight. That's great. We've got a podcast, 3 podcasts, Christian Crusaders. We've got the CC podcast, Conversations, which does interviews with people. We have an interview on there with Ron Gruber, a great interview with Tim and Ike Butker about Ike's journey to the NFL and some others. And you can see how to subscribe to these podcasts with a bookmark that is back on our table. We're also doing a daily devotional podcast, and then we've got radio broadcast programming that is on the CC Broadcast podcast, which that's maybe a little bit confusing. But we would invite you to grab one of those bookmarks and follow us. Christian Crusaders is a ministry that I help lead, and therefore it's a partner. We partner with the Cedar Falls Bible Conference, Cedar Falls Bible Conference with Christian Crusaders. We're very like-minded. We're on the same essential mission, and so we thought we'd mention that tonight. Tonight, after the concert, or after the conference, after the session, we're going to wait 10 minutes after the end of the session, and then Christy and her family are going to come out and do just a mini concert for us. We thought, gosh, if we're bringing her all the way out here for the Cedar Falls Bible Conference for a couple days, we might as well have her not just lead worship for 20 or 25 minutes each night, but also do a mini concert. They were gracious enough to do that. So she's going to do about 30 minutes of concert, about 10 minutes after the session ends. And so what parents need to know is childcare is over when the session ends. So please go get your kids, and then you can come back for the concert. If you want to go outside and get some popcorn, we've got Here's What's Poppin' again and Scratch again. Concession stand will be open. Concert's going to be really informal. Just kind of come and go as you please, mingle around, but we're excited to hear that. By the way, is it great to have Christy Knuckles here? Amen. And I think it's so cool that she gets to do this with her husband and her son. I mean, if I was living that life, I'd want to travel with my family, and that's great. So I think that's all I've got right now. Oh, one other thing. Wanda at the concession stand has a bunch of mugs and tumblers for sale. Price is right. I think $5 for the mugs and $10 for the tumblers. And we're going to get rid of all that stuff because next year when we have our 100th, we're probably going to do something a little bit different with our logo. And we're going to make some T-shirts and different little merchy type stuff to commemorate our 100th. So we want to get rid of that stuff. It's great. There's some T-shirts back there still, so check that out. And obviously, as always, Joyce has the bookstore with all of J. Warner Wallace's books, along with other speakers we've had this week, along with other speakers we've had in previous years, and some other Christian books, so check that out. Thanks to those folks. All right, we're going to bring Jim back up here, and I thought it would be interesting. The first time I was introduced to Jim Wallace, my son Mason and I, he's 16 now, but in 2014, when he was, what would that be, 10 years old, starting in 10, if he's 16 now, did someone say 14? Math, brother. No. Jim was talking about that. Math isn't math anymore. 20 minus 6 might not be 14 anymore. I don't know. We started seeing the Yankees play in every ballpark. And we would do this to spend time together and to kind of do some discipleship on the road together. And sometimes we'll fly to a city and then drive to another city. So we, like, for instance, flew to Phoenix and then drove to San Diego to see a game, but we just wanted to see some of that country instead of flying straight to San Diego, so you got some car time. And we have some car time. We listen to some books on tape or talk about different things. And one of the books that we listened to was Jim's book, Cold Case Christianity. And as soon as I heard that, I thought, man, this guy would be great at the Cedar Falls Bible Conference someday, not knowing that I'd be the director before long. And just kind of in the back of my mind. And then last year when Josh McDowell was here, or when Sean McDowell was here, Sean said, you got to get Jim to come to one of your conferences. And fortunately, he was good enough to come. And I think he's going to set us up with some other contacts who will be good to come in the future. I think he's having a good time so far. He's certainly dressed right with the plaid jacket. And so, Jim, come on out. And it's great to have you here. Thanks for being here again.
Well, I'm so glad that you all came back tonight, a lot more actually than were here this morning. So I want to talk to you a little bit about making the case for why we think Christianity is true. We started this morning just talking about how the case begins with a case for truth, and we did some of that. We also made a case for why we ought to make the case. And I told you that tonight when we get together, we're actually going to start to make that case proper. If there is no truth, no objective truth about God, then there's no point in talking about God. It's just a matter of opinion. If there is no God, then there's no point in talking about Christianity. These things build on each other. Now, we've talked about truth, so tonight what we're going to do is we're going to talk about God. How do we know that God exists? Now, for some of you who were here earlier, you already know my story, so I feel kind of funny repeating it, but just so I will for the rest of you who weren't here, coming out of Southern California, I worked in Los Angeles County for 25 years, working mostly cold case homicides. These are just the unsolved murders that occur in our county. There is no statute of limitations on a murder. So if you do a robbery and a certain number of years go by, that thing closes whether we solve it or not. But murders don't close that way. They stay open. So it's funny that they invited someone this morning for the 1 o'clock and for last night who was convicted of a homicide, and now you get the guy who actually does the convicting most of the time. I feel stupid about that, but that's just the way it is. So what I want to do is to kind of show you the process that I used at the age of 35 to determine that God exists. Because I was not a believer. I wasn't raised around Christians, no Christians in my family. It's not hard to grow up in Los Angeles County and not meet a Christian. And that was my experience. I didn't really meet Christians until I was working as a cop. And the Christians that I did meet were pretty lame. I mean, the cops I knew who were Christians could not defend what they believed. They could tell you 5 reasons why this guy's your robbery suspect. They couldn't give me 5 reasons why I could trust the Bible, though. And the other group we would meet all the time were the people who were taken to jail, who would tell us that they were Christians. And I thought, okay, there you go. 2 groups. Ones who can't defend it and the ones who can't live it. And I wanted no part of that. Now, my son was raised differently. He's a police officer also. He's stuck with my name because we're not creative people. His name is Jim Wallace. And he was raised as a Christian because by the time I got saved, he was about 8. And now he's 31. Doing the same job that I did for years before him. Wearing pretty much the same uniform. Patches are a little bit different. I wore the same uniform my dad wore before me. Patches are a little bit different. He's also named Jim Wallace. We've been at the agency as Jim Wallace for 60 years, since 1961. I was born in my dad's academy. My son was born when I was in the academy. So we both lost a lot of sleep during that portion of time. Now, I'm going to try to cover, by the way, this is our family now. My dad's still around. He's 80 years old. He's as ornery as ever, so he lives in Northeast Texas. But I'm going to share with you something I talked about this morning in this movie I did called God's Not Dead 2. How can we make a brief case that is insightful, that will actually demonstrate that God exists or that the Bible is true? And you only get a few seconds to do this in a movie. And so I only had like 6 minutes. And we've been taking 6 sessions to do what you can do in 6 minutes. So I want to give you a foundation to be able to do that. All right. We're going to do some stuff tonight out of a book called God's Crime Scene. But I'm not here to sell you a book. They're here to sell you a book. And I want you to buy the book from them because I feel bad that they bought all those darn books. We got to get rid of them. Well, I'm going to teach you from a different book tonight. A book I use occasionally that teaches people how to work death scenes. So we're going to do what I call Death Scene Investigations 101. I'm going to teach you how to work a death scene. But I got to show you a dead body in order to do that. So, yeah, this is a weird way to demonstrate that God exists, right? But let's look at a dead body together. He looks suspiciously like my son Jimmy, doesn't he? This is back in his academy days before he was working at Trader Joe's there. You can tell it's a little logo. Do you have a Trader Joe's here anywhere? No, you guys need a Trader Joe's. Great place to go. Now, how do I know what kind of a death this is? This may not even be a criminal death. He could have died some other way. I don't know this is a murder. Just because you got a dead guy does not mean you have a murder. How do you determine that a death scene is a crime scene? Well, I'm going to teach you how to do that tonight. What you do is you make two lists that begin with an E. On one side, you make a list of evidences. And right now, all I have is a dead guy laying face down. Okay, that's fine. That's something. Let's put that on the wall. We'll put it here under the evidences. And on the other side, we're going to list all the ways to explain the evidence. So we have evidences and explanations. That make sense? And of course, all we have so far for evidences is a dead guy laying face down. Now, how do we explain dead guys laying face down? Do you know? There are 4 ways that people die. Do you guys know what they are? If you do, raise your hand or just shout out. What's the one way people die? A suicide. Yep. Natural death. What else? Murder. What else? Well, what kind of trauma? Okay, you're close. You're close. These are the 4 ways people die. Natural deaths. Sometimes people have an accident, accidental death, or they commit suicide, or they can be killed by somebody else. These are the 4 ways that people die. Now the question is, which of these 4 ways makes the most sense of the evidence? We're looking at the evidence and then trying to find the best explanation that fits it. So right now, what can I cross out? Go ahead, yell it out. Natural. Well, if he had a heart attack, he would look like that, wouldn't he? Well, if he intentionally took too many pills, he would look like this. If he accidentally took too many pills, he would look like, if I poisoned him with too many pills. Do you see the problem? With this little bit of information, I really can't cross anything out. Let's change the scenario. What if he's a dead guy laying face down, but now he's in a pool of his own blood center torso? By the way, tomorrow night we're going to kill him in an entirely different way, okay? Just so you know. He's my son. I can kill him any way I want. So, okay, so now we have this. Now let's just add that piece of evidence to our evidence list, okay? So we have a more robust evidence list. All right, so now what can I cross out? Now remember, I am not after what's possible, because anything is possible. These are the explanatory possibilities. We're trying to get down to what's reasonable, folks, because the standard of proof is not beyond a possible doubt, because there's nothing you think you know that I could not level a possible or imaginary doubt against it. Nothing. You think you're here right now? Oh, really? How do you know? There are actual philosophers who believe that the entire universe is nothing more than a computer simulation. That's right. So how would you know? Even your thoughts are part of the simulation. That's not reasonable, though, is it? That's why we're not after possible. We're after reasonable. So, okay, these are all possible, but which one is no longer reasonable? Yeah, I mean, I don't know where you could naturally bleed center torso, okay? Is it possible? Yes. But is it reasonable? No. And I can now cross out natural death. But until I roll this dude over and see what the injury is, I'm not sure I can rule out anything else yet. I got to see the injury. So let's go back and let's change our scenario slightly. What if he's a dead guy laying face down in a pool of his own blood, and he has a single gunshot wound, kind of center torso. We find the gun by his side, and the wound is actually an exit wound. So this is an exit wound. Single casing, pistols on the side. Now, I can put this on the list. Tell me, what can I rule out? Really? If he thought the gun was unloaded, that's an exit wound. And he's handling the gun, he could shoot himself accidentally. This could also be a suicide. This could also be a homicide. I can't rule anything out. Not yet. Let's change it. What if I've got a guy laying face down in a pool of his own blood, he's got a single gunshot wound, and there is a note off to the side, written in his own handwriting, on a piece of paper I find elsewhere in the room. It's his paper, it's his handwriting. It has his fingerprints on the paper. It has his skin cell transfer on the paper and DNA. It's his handwriting, his pen. Now, would that change things? I think it might. Let's go back and look at our list now. We'll add that to our list. And now let's see, what can I cross out now? Yeah, he may have accidentally shot himself before he intended to shoot himself. But I think I can pretty much rule out accidental. Now, are you convinced like I am this is a suicide, right? This is a suicide, right? Okay, raise your hand if you think, oh no, if I found this, if I found a man with a single gunshot wound and there was a note written in his own handwriting in which he is planning a suicide, I would still say it wasn't a suicide. Okay, which of you think that? Raise your hand. You just said no a minute ago, so raise your hand. I want to see where you are. Really? These are all people who watch Criminal Minds, okay? Just so you know. That's who these people are. Which is a stupid show. So how do you explain the suicide note? In his own handwriting. It's coerced. That's Criminal Minds right there, okay? I've been on Dateline, but I would never go on Criminal Minds. Okay, let's change the scenario and get that out of your head. What if this time he has been shot multiple times and the wounds are entry wounds in his back, not exit wounds? What if now, when I examine the paper, it's not his handwriting, it's not his paper, it's not his pen. It doesn't even have his DNA anywhere on it, or his fingerprints are not on it. Not only that, imagine there are now bloody footprints leading out of the room. Would that change things? All these new, you can tell, by the way, this is a California murder, can't you? Barefoot. That was Christy before she found those shoes, those sneakers, okay? All right, so let's put this on the list. There it is. Now I think I can reasonably cross out suicide. Would you agree? It's kind of hard to shoot yourself multiple times in the back and then walk out of the room in your own blood. That's hard to do. So this is no longer reasonable. This is what's reasonable. Are we clear on this? I just taught you a process that we're going to use tomorrow night on the resurrection. But this process is called abductive reasoning. It's simply inferring to the most reasonable explanation. And we ask detectives to do this at every death scene. We ask jurors to do this in every criminal trial. Which of these explanations is most reasonable given the evidence? Does that make sense? Okay. Now, I'm also showing you another weird thing. It's a thing I call inside or outside the room. And here's how it works. If you get to a scene like this, and you can explain everything you find in the room by staying in the room for an explanation, it's not a murder. Did you hear what I said? If you can explain everything that's in the room by staying in the room for an explanation, it's not a murder. Let me show it to you a little more graphically. Okay, so here we have our guy. Let's put him in a box instead of the room. So here he is in the box. We're going to play this game of inside or outside the room. So imagine the scenario is like I first drew it, okay, where you've got a guy who's got a single gunshot wound and there's a note. Now think about that. If that was the case and I found just his handwriting on the note, it's his paper, came from inside the room, the pen's from inside the room, he was inside the room, the handwriting's from inside the room, I can explain that note by staying inside the room for an answer. Make sense? And if I talk to people and they say, oh, yeah, that's his gun, he's owned it for years, keeps it in a safe in the corner of the room, it's registered to him. It only got his skin cell transfer on it. Okay, I can explain the gun by staying inside the room for an explanation. And, anyone can shoot themselves once without any help from anybody outside the room. So even the single gunshot wound when we first started, that could be explained by staying in the room. And if that's the case, it's going to be one of these, it's not going to be a natural, clearly, but it's going to be an accidental or a suicide because I can explain everything that's in the room by staying in the room. Are we clear? On the other hand, if I have to go outside the room, because let's say, for example, yeah, it's not his fingerprints, it's not his paper, it's not his pen, it's not his skin cell transfer, and I got to figure out who did this then. It's not somebody who lives with him even. Okay, it's got to go outside the room for an explanation. And if someone says, oh, you know what, he doesn't like guns, he hates guns, he's paranoid about guns, he would never own a gun, and sure enough, it's not registered to him. So now I got to go outside the room to figure out whose gun is that. And it's kind of hard to shoot yourself multiple times. Better than somebody else probably did it, right? And also, I've got bloody footprints leading out of the room. So clearly, there's somebody I'm looking for who's outside the room. when the best explanations for the stuff in the room is a cause outside the room, it all shifts to homicide. Why? Because these are really intruder investigations. Do we have good reason to believe that we have an intruder? And intruders are what changes everything. In fact, it's intruders that turn death scenes into crime scenes. And you might have had some sense of curiosity about, like, why would this happen? Why would he kill himself? Why would this happen this way? But once you know you've got an intruder, your sense of curiosity better turn into a sense of urgency, because you really only have a short amount of time to effectuate the arrest. In other words, there is a show out there, not Criminal Minds, okay, that is pretty accurate. And it's boring, I think. It's called The First 48. Have you ever seen that show? I'm not even sure it's still on. It's probably one of the number of cop shows that's been canceled in the last 2 months. But my point is, this changes everything. Now, why am I going through all of this with you today? Because when I first got interested in Christianity, it's because I walked into a church. I was 35 years old. My wife took years to get me to go to this church. I get there, and the pastor says that Jesus is the smartest man who ever lived. And I thought, really? That provoked me to buy a Bible. And I started to investigate this guy to see who he was. And at some point, I needed to know, if God doesn't exist, then nothing about God in the New Testament is true. So I started to ask this question. But I wasn't asking the question about a dead guy in a room. Instead, I said, could I apply this approach to the entire known universe? There's a bunch of stuff inside the universe. The question is, can I explain everything that's in there by staying in there? Now, what's in here right now is just space, time, and matter. Physics and chemistry operating on space, time, and matter. That's all you have to cook with in the natural universe. That make sense? So I've got to explain everything I find in here with just space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry. That changes things. Now I'm going to play a little game of inside or outside the room. There are actually 8 things I think are in the room that scream for explanation. And as an atheist, I knew there were not really any good explanations for these 8 things that people agreed on anyway. But I used to always think, well, hey, we'll figure that out someday. We are in a universe that has a beginning. Did you realize that? It's not eternally, infinitely old. It has a beginning. All space, time, and matter came into existence. It's called Big Bang cosmology. It's still the standard cosmological model amongst astrophysicists, cosmologists. Most agree that the evidence, the scientific evidence, points to a universe that came into existence from nothing. I'm not saying there was a spatial void and then the universe began. No. Space is not nothing. It's something. There was no space before space. Well, what was there? Nothing. Well, what do you mean by nothing? What rocks dream about? Nothing. Got it? So I'm looking for a cause of space, time, and matter that is outside of space, time, and matter. To be honest with you, already I'm outside the room. But also the universe appears to be fine-tuned. How do I explain that? And life originates in the universe from inorganic non-life. How does that work? And then when it does emerge, it has the appearance of design. And even the most esteemed evolutionists, evolution biologists, zoologists like Richard Dawkins, who's a pretty famous atheist, would say and agree that biology is simply the study of things that look to have been designed for a purpose, but they aren't. That's what he would say. So the appearance of design is non-controversial. How you explain the appearance is. Also, we have immaterial minds. You're thinking about this right now. Are you just using your brain? Or are you using your mind? You have a material brain, but how do we explain our immaterial experience of mind? Is it an illusion? Well, people who are committed atheists, like, say, Sam Harris, who's a neuroscientist and an atheist, he thinks your mind is an illusion. You have a brain, but not a mind. And that poses a problem, because that means you don't really have free agency. Because you're not an immaterial mind making free choices. You simply think you made a choice because a neuron fired based on a prior neuron firing over which you had no control. In a physical universe, you have what's called event causation. One domino hits another domino and it falls over. But you don't have agent causation. Dominoes don't get to decide if they fall over. They fall over if they're touched. That's how physical things work. And if all you have is a brain, then you not just lose your ability to think freely, you lose all kinds of free agency because you only have a physical brain, no immaterial mind. That's why that thinkers about this call this the problem of mind. And you can look up the book, Problem of Mind is very common. It's a problem because we can't explain it in a physical universe. Also, we talked this morning about objective, transcendent moral truths. How do we ground those? And how do we even ground a standard of righteousness by which we could judge something and call it evil? Look, I'm not going to be able to go through all this with you. I teach this course at Biola, and it takes me 17 hours with students to go through all of this. I'm not going to torture you. As a matter of fact, I thought about it. I thought, look, we have all night, so let's just go ahead and lock the doors. I'm not going to let you out of here until I'm done. But I decided not to do that. Therefore, there is a God. So I've already proved it, okay? Because I could just keep you in here. Now, it turns out that two of these are entirely cosmological, astrophysics. Two of them are biological, two are mental, and two are moral. And we're not going to be able to cover all this, but I'm going to send you everything we don't cover. Now, to get this talk, they're making a copy of it back there, so you can get a copy. But to get the other 7 pieces, because I'm only going to cover one of these, I'm going to send those to you. Okay? And it's going to cost you a lot of money. 0. You're going to get that. It turns out, I think that you cannot explain these 8 things by staying inside the room. You cannot get these 8 things with just space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry. You have to go outside the room to explain the stuff that's inside the room, and there's the problem. Because now I know we've got an intruder. Only the question is, this intruder is on the scale of the cosmos, transcends everything. And that's why I wrote a book called God's Crime Scene. When I wrote the book, my publisher said, you can't call it God's crime scene. It sounds like you're saying that God committed a crime. I'm saying no. I'm saying that you could actually investigate the universe like a crime scene to discover first cause. Make sense? And that's what we're going to do tonight. Let's go back to our model. This is our dead guy. This is the evidence we have in the room. Those are the 4 explanations. Now we're going to flip this to the universe. There are 8 pieces of evidence in the room, and we have one of 2 possible explanations. We can either stay inside the room and explain this with space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry, or we can jump outside the room and explain this with an extra natural cause. Which is a more reasonable inference from the evidence in the room? And what we're going to do, we're going to talk about just one of these. We're going to talk about how life emerged from non-life. And I'm going to give it to you as I give everything by way of an analogy. I had a case a number of years ago, about 4 days before New Year's Day. A man was shot in his business. He was a mechanic. He had a garage. We get there. He's been shot in the head. And by his side is a cell phone. That cell phone had a text message. I didn't understand it when I first saw it. I'm like, what does that even mean? Is that like a butt dial? Is that a malfunction of the phone? Or does somebody intend that to be a message, although it was coded to me? Maybe you guys recognize this. I didn't recognize it at the time. So I did a little research. It turns out this lady right here, Rachel, was my deceased guy's wife, who had been cheating on him for the entire year, and told her boyfriend, I want you to kill this guy before the end of the year. And now we are 4 days before the end of the year. So Mr. Procrastinator had not gotten it done. So on the day of the murder, he finally decides, well, I got like 72 hours, but I'll just go ahead and do it today. Gets in a car, and he drives over to kill her husband. About that time, her husband calls home and says, hey, it's like there's no business here. It's between the holidays. It's dead here, no pun intended. So I might as well come home. And she's like, oh, that's not going to work. Boyfriend's on the way to kill him. So she texted him something that she would always do. The number would be different. And what she was saying here was, I'll be there in 30 minutes. So he didn't leave. And 15 minutes later, he was shot in the head. So determining that this was not a butt dial, that this was actually a message, is what helped us to solve the case, right? Because now I have a good first interview. What's the first thing I'm going to do? I'm going to be interviewing her to see why is she trying to keep him there. By the way, did you ever go to see? Oh, I didn't. Well, okay, so you didn't even go, yet you told him to stay because you were coming. Really? Well, it turns out the mystery to how life originates in the universe is much like this dial. It's something you already know about because you remember this from school. DNA. Do you remember DNA? this strand of DNA. It's the longest molecule in our bodies. It's the largest molecule known to man. And it has 4 nucleotides that are in a certain order, and that order is not random. That order is actually specific. It's a code, a digital code, that informs everything your body does. How your body is constructed, your propensity towards certain behaviors, hair color, genetic disorders. Now my son, I have 2 sons, one's a doctor. Before he became a doctor, he was a biochemist, and he was solving kidney disease by rewiring, recoding DNA. Because it turns out some tumors are formed because of errors in the code or degeneration of the code. The code was something to begin with, and then it degenerates over time, and it creates tumors. Now, this is the problem with this. As I'm looking at this thing, I'm thinking, okay, so you're telling me that this nucleotide sequence is information that is instructing the formation of your proteins, instructing the formation of your micromachines in your cells from proteins. If that's information, how do we explain that? And somebody before me actually has done some good thinking. His name is Stephen C. Meyer, who is a philosopher of science from Cambridge, I believe. Here's his big takeaway. It's a book called Signature in the Cell. Here's the takeaway. I'll give it to you. There's not a single example anywhere in the history of science, in the history of the universe, in which information ever comes from anything other than intelligence. Now, if we're going to stay in the room, we've got to get information with space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry. Intelligence is not an option. There's no intelligence in the room. So how do we explain the information in DNA? I'll tell you what I would have said as an atheist. You're wrong. It's not information. It might look like information, but it can't be, because you can't get information from anything other than intelligence, and I reject the presence of intelligence in this issue, so it's got to be non-information. Or I would say, if it is information, you can get it with space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry. That's what I want to finish with you. I want to show you why that can't be done. In order to do this, I'm going to teach you something about information theory. And if you want to go to sleep quickly tonight, I want you to get Werner Gitt's book. Because his book on information theory is mostly formulas. Formulas in which he's talking about the levels of information. And he's offering 5 levels of information. But rather than destroy your evening with this, I'm going to throw it in a way I think you can catch it. Because I needed to throw it to myself. First of all, let me just start by asking you a question. How many of you here love cats? Raise your hand. Raise your hand, seriously. If you're a man raising your hand right now, you should be ashamed of yourself. Put your hand down. What is wrong with you? Seriously? I have a cat. Most of the time I feel like, you know that last scene in Avengers where the Hulk takes the bad guy, just beats him. That's what I feel like doing with the cat with his tail. I swear to you. Cats are not any word you've been using to describe your cat. Oh, he's just finicky. Replace that word with the word stupid and see if it doesn't also work. It does. Oh, he only eats certain things because he's finicky. No, he's stupid. And he doesn't go out when I tell him to because, he's got his own mind. No, he's stupid. How many of you have a dog? Raise your hand if you have a dog. Okay. That's better. How many of you think you have the best breed of dog ever bred? Okay, you are stupid. But I'm going to go ahead. It's okay. Keep your hand up. I want to hear what you think is the best. As a matter of fact, if we were going to make a list of the best breeds ranked from 9 to 1, some of you people think you have a 1 down here or a 2. So raise your hand if you think you have a 1 or a 2. Okay, you tell me what breed it is. Go.
Jack Russell Terrier.
Jack Russell. 2 of you. Why need 2 of those? Because 1 is barely a dog. Seriously. If you take both of them and you wire them together, you have 1 dog. Seriously. That's not that doesn't count. Go. A lab. Okay, I like labs, okay, but they are dumb. Let's be honest. Labs are the dumbest dogs in the world. That's why we love them so much. They can barely find their way home. My dad had a black lab, several, that he would run with in East Texas, except they would run in the street and get hit by cars because they're dumb. No, it's not a lab. No, give me another shot. So, what, a dachshund? A dachshund. Do I need to say any more about that? No. Dachshund. Dachshund. Come on, give me something better than a dachshund. Go. Australian? You said the same thing at the same time. If you had to put the word Australian in front of your shepherd, it's because your shepherd's kind of got an inferiority complex, right? Shepherd's like, oh no, I'm an Australian shepherd. One more desperate attempt from this audience at a good dog. Go right back here. You're raising your hand in the middle of the row. Right there, young lady. What is your best dog? A poodle. I had a sheepdog, a big sheepdog one time, and then we sent her to the groomer, and they trimmed her like a poodle. And she couldn't look at herself in the mirror. Seriously, she was ashamed of herself because she was trimmed like a poodle. No. I get it. Like, we all have our favorite dog, right? And it doesn't seem fair. Like, you shouldn't even do this, right? Because some people would say, well, look, you can't really rank them because every dog is special in their own way. Wrong. Corgis. Corgis. I have a corgi. That is the queen. The queen does not have any of your dogs, okay? The queen has corgis, or had corgis, right? Why? Because corgis are the queens of dogs. These are the most special. You realize they come from their own part of the country, right? You know where they breed corgis, don't you know? You don't know where that is? In South Carolina, right there. Take a look at it. Here's North Carolina. Here's South Carolina. You never noticed that before? It's true. That's where they breed them. My dog's name is Bailey. The most common name for dogs, did you know that, is Bailey. But if I put a typewriter and I ask Bailey to type out a sentence, I wonder what she would type. Whatever she's going to type, I will write it on the wall. So here's her first effort typing a sentence. I think it's pretty good. Here it is. What do you think? Not bad. Is that information? In a sense, it is. In the sense that it's complex. But information is two things. It has complexity and specificity. So it's complex. For example, what are the odds of her typing this sentence twice exactly the same way? Not very good because it's very complex. But what does she mean? I don't know. I can't tell because it's not specific. I don't recognize specific words. So in a sense, at a very low level, this is information. And if Bailey was a little bit better and she could type patterns, like a TT spacebar, you'd be impressed with her. You'd say she's a very smart dog. And if the pattern was even a little more involved, T13T spacebar, you'd be really impressed. And this is at a very low level information. You could get this by staying in the room. This looks a lot like a random pattern. And there are some laws, some natural attractions, gravitational attractions, crystalline attractions, that if you reduce them to numbers, they produce patterns that repeat. You can get this with just physics and chemistry on space, time, and matter. But this is the lowest level of information. Werner calls this statistics. Not the way you're thinking of it, but that's what he calls it. And if that's what DNA is, you can get that by staying in the room. But that is not what DNA is. What if Bailey was a little bit smarter? And now when she types this. Not bad. I don't know what she means, though. She has the specificity of words, but she's not yet put them in a sentence I can understand. But to be able to be specific about using words that she knows are codes that I can decode on my side, that's fascinating if she can do that. And you would say that's intelligence, right? If you saw that coming across the wires from listening to the universe, you would say, wow, there's life out there. We are now outside of what the room can do for you. We are one level outside of what space, time, and matter can give you. This is the second level of information. It is called cosyntics. You can't get this with space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry, but this is not yet what DNA is. What if Bailey could do an even better job? And now she can actually give me a sentence. I know now what she means. She means that Grandpa is eating. This is a whole other level of information. We're now 2 levels outside of the room. And this is called semantics. Now, I know people who are they're learning the language, and they're kind of stuck between 2 and 3, right? They can't quite figure out how to conjugate certain verbs or get the right order. Do I put it in front or behind? I was at a restaurant in Malibu, California, a Thai food restaurant. I walk in the washroom, there's a sign, and the sign says, in the washroom, please do not throw paper wiping hand down a toilet. I'm not inclined to do that, actually. I'm not sure I need a sign for that. But I think what he means is don't throw the paper you're using to wipe your hands in the toilet. But you can tell he's stuck between a 2 and a 3. Kind of like not quite there. Let's go back to our list. Okay. What if Bailey is so smart that she can actually make a request of Grandpa? Like she doesn't want to just describe that Grandpa's eating. She wants Grandpa to feed her. The ability to make a request with your language is a whole other level of information. So this sentence, come on, feed me, let's eat. That is something that is known as pragmatics. And if Bailey is so, by the way, this is still not DNA. But if Bailey is so smart that she's actually asking to get fed because she knows from her memory that every time she eats, she gets to get walked. And she's really after the walk, the second domino. So she asks to get fed so she can go on the walk. That's very different. That is called apobetics. That is what DNA is. 4 levels outside the room. It's 4 times, it's impossible to get this with space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry. Now, one way to tell the difference between low-level information and high-level information is simply to look at it and ask yourself, what is she saying? I know what she's saying down here. I have no idea what she's saying up here. That's one way to look at it. Another way is to ask this question. If I remove a single character, does the meaning change? So up here, I can remove a character. It ain't going to change the meaning because I can't understand her before. It's just the same old junk. I think you know where I'm headed with this, don't you? This is why we say that commas save lives, okay? Because in high-level information, the removal of any one character, just the exact same character we had before, and the entire sentence changes. If I take out the comma, sweet little Bailey, who just wants to get fed, turns into Grandpa killing Bailey who wants to eat Grandpa. See the difference? In case you're wondering, this is Grandpa right here. Okay? Now let's go to somebody like, I think this is Billy the Kid. Might be Jesse James, I'm not sure. Maybe you guys know who this is. If we were to kind of map out his genetic code, it would go off in this direction for about, 5 miles and off in that. It's the longest molecule. It's an amazing collection of information. And it turns out that making a small change in the code has an impact. That's why we know it's the highest level of information. That's why genetic therapies are effective, because we go in and we rewrite the code and we see if we can get the tumor to not appear. So if you just take something simple, like let's say one of these, and we change it out, now it turns out there is a level of self-correction that's designed into the code, believe it or not. This is how crazy it is. But you can't defeat the self-correction. And if we change the order of the code, the information in the code, something about him is going to change. The level of his forehead, his nose, his ears, something is going to change. Why? Because in high-level information, when you change a character, you change meaning. And this is why we know that DNA information is high. And this is why a lot of skeptics stumble at this point. So, for example, someone like Paul Davies, who's an agnostic, is not a believer. He's at Arizona State University. He says it this way: we're still left with the mystery of where biological information comes from, right? I mean, because the normal laws of physics can't inject information, and he knows they can't. And if we're ruling out miracles, and he will because he's not a believer, then how can life be predetermined and inevitable rather than a freak accident? How is it possible to generate random complexity and specificity together in a law-like manner? We always come back to that basic paradox. That's right, you can't explain it by staying inside the room. A very committed atheist of the last century, probably the most committed atheist, one of the most famous atheists of the 20th century, discovered the same thing. His name is Antony Flew. He was very well published as an atheist. He was one of those guys in the generation of C.S. Lewis. He actually knew C.S. Lewis. They would talk about these things together. And Antony Flew, as a committed atheist, made a name for himself. I mean, he did a lot of debates. He debated William Lane Craig, another very famous Christian apologist. And he was a signatory of the Humanist Manifesto. He made his living as an atheist philosopher until he discovered DNA. His last book is a book called There Is a God. How the world's most notorious atheist changed his mind. And here's what he said. He said, I now believe there's a God. I now think the evidence does point to a creative intelligence almost entirely because of the DNA investigations. What I think the DNA material has done is that it has shown by the almost unbelievable complexity of the arrangements which are needed to produce life that intelligence must have been involved in getting these extraordinary diverse elements to work together. Look at it this way. Remember our death scene where the guy was on the floor? And we're not quite sure what kind of death it is? So if we get there, we could look at the blood spatter. And I often will have to do this. I went to a class years ago when I was a young guy in Sacramento, California. And what we did there was we did blood spatter. So the nurse would come in, and she was a pathologist. She was great. She would come in with pints of blood. And we would put them in different locations and soak different kinds of materials with the blood. And then we would whack these things to see where the spatter would go. And learn how to follow the trajectories back and locate the point of impact. But if all I had in a room and I got there and the body is over here and all I have is this, I still don't know what this is. I mean, he could have fallen and hit his head accidentally. He could have had a heart attack, hit his head, and then this can be explained with just physics and chemistry. Space, time, and matter. Because if you think about it, the blood has a certain chemistry. It sticks a certain way. It rolls a certain way. And the physics of trajectory could explain the spatter. So this is not going to tell me anything about whether this is a murder. It's just going to tell me where the point of his impact was. Make sense? But if I get to the same room, and on the wall, I have a message written in his blood, you deserved it. This is different. This I cannot explain with space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry because this requires an intelligent mind as the author. Does this make sense? If you saw this at the crime scene, you wouldn't go, oh yeah, must have happened with space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry. No, you wouldn't. You'd say, let's go find the murderer. Who did this? That's the dilemma for people who are trying to explain DNA without intelligence as a source. Now look, to stay in the room, there's only two ways to do it. Either it's chance, and I don't think anyone thinks it's chance. The strand of information is not chance. Or it's just a matter of law. It's physics and chemistry law, natural law. In other words, either it's just an accident or it was inevitable because physics determined the arrangement of nucleotides. It's just physics, chemistry, and environment, and that's all we need to explain it. And those are the two ways they offer an explanation for this, by the way. And they don't work. The first one's got its own problems. I don't think anyone really thinks it's an accident. But even worse, there are chicken and egg problems. Do you realize that your body is built from Legos? Legos that are called proteins. Those proteins are formed from amino acids. Now, the proteins are formed from amino acids in a machine in your body called a ribosome. And a ribosome machine takes the amino acids and forms them based on genetic information. It creates the proteins that are then used to build every microorganism in your body. Everything, including your organs, but even within the cell. It's created because ribosomes turn amino acids into proteins. But here's the problem. The ribosome machine is made with what? Proteins. So the machine you need to make proteins has to have proteins to start with, and there's your chicken and egg problem. There's a ton of these in biology. You're never going to explain those with chance. And if you think you can get information from physics and chemistry, that's great. That burden's on you, not on me. That's not my claim. Your claim is that you can get information from physics and chemistry. Knock yourself out. When you can show me that, I'll believe it. Until then, I'm thinking the most reasonable inference is going to be intelligence. Does that make sense? Because that's what I always see. Our practical experience tells us repeatedly that information comes from intelligence. So there's the third option. It could just be information. But if it's information, we've now got to go outside the room because we can't get this with space, time, and matter. So now the best explanation for the stuff that's in the room is a cause outside the room, and that. By the way, when we do investigations, these are the questions we ask, right? Classic questions. Every investigation, we ask those classic questions. Scientists do the same thing, only I left the most important one off. If I asked all these questions, no one's ever going to hit the bucket. No one's ever going to go to jail. Why? Because I haven't yet asked the most important question, which is the who question. Who did it? Now, science, 150 years ago, asked all the questions. The who question plus all of those. Not anymore. You can talk to scientists. Why don't you ask the who question? You're leaving the question off. Well, there's no who's in science. Well, why? Because there aren't. Okay, I get it. You've decided there aren't any who's in science. But why have you decided there aren't any who's in science? There just aren't. So if I've got information and the best explanation for information is a who, not a what, am I allowed to ask the who question? No. That's how you come up with stupid answers, okay? If you're going to force every answer through a what, when there's actually is clearly a who, you're going to get all kinds of crazy. And that's what we're seeing right now with genetic information. If I'm not allowed to ask the who, all I'm saying to all of you young people in the room who want to pursue science as a Christian believer, please do. Because Kepler, Galileo, all the scientists until probably, there's a lot of scientists right now. 60% of Nobel Science Prize winners are Christians, folks. You can do science and ask all 6 questions. You don't have to leave the most important question out. I don't jump to a who every time I don't have an explanation. I reserve the who when I can explain it no other way, and when I have good affirmative evidence, there's a who. Like I showed you the blood spatter versus the written letter. We have good reason to believe there's a who. So ask the who question. And this is what Werner Gitz says. He says, yeah, you should be asking who questions. A necessary requirement for generating meaningful information is the ability to select between alternatives, okay? You pick the letters you're going to use. You pick the words you're going to use. And this requires an intelligent volitional entity, a person, because unguided random processes can't get this done. It doesn't matter how much time you give them. They will never get it done because this selection process demands continuous guidance by minds, intelligent beings that have a purpose. So for me, I'm going, okay, it's going to be a who, an intelligent, communicative who. Now we started with this analogy, this inside or outside the room analogy. Now in my books, I get to draw all the illustrations, so they're just pen and ink drawings, so they look like this. These are the 8 things that I think we have to explain. And we have to explain them by either staying in the room or going outside the room. I think the best explanation for all 8 things lies outside the room. And that will give me a suspect profile. You realize when I go to a crime scene, I know something about what I'm expecting before I ever meet that guy. And I can kind of start to describe him just based on the evidence at the scene. I can develop a suspect profile. Does that make sense? In other words, which of these 2 cases would you rather work? A guy is killed at a gas station behind the counter, and the money is taken out of the register. He's shot in the head. Same guy, instead of being killed there, is killed in his bedroom where he is stabbed 70 times in the groin. Which would you rather work? I want the bedroom. Right? Because think about it. At the gas station, the suspect pool is all humans on planet Earth. Which of these 2 cases do you think somebody who is intimately familiar with our victim did the crime? I'm guessing it's in the bedroom. So one case involves an entire suspect pool of all of humanity. The other case just involves whoever he's been sleeping with. That's a much narrower pool. Give me the second case. Make sense? Crime scenes tell you something about your suspect. Same thing happens here. I can develop a suspect profile because I've got to explain these 8 things. I can tell you one thing for sure. It ain't Mick Jagger, okay? He got arrested a bunch of times when we were young. But I'll tell you what, this is not my suspect. Why? Because I need a suspect that can explain those 8 things. That can explain the beginning. I need a suspect that's outside of space, time, and matter and can cause all space, time, and matter to come into existence and look like it's fine-tuned because it's the fine-tuner of the universe, can create information in DNA by way of mind that starts life and then is the designer behind the appearance of design in biology, is the mind that creates other beings in its image who also have minds, who think freely like it does because it thinks freely because it's a mind. and it's the objective, transcendent source of all moral truth, and even the standard of righteousness by which we judge evil. That's what I'm looking for, and that ain't Mick Jagger. He can't do that. But this turns out to be the absolute standard, classic definition of God. And you can get here without opening your Bible, because we didn't use a single Bible verse tonight. And I would never have let you use your Bible to prove to me your Bible is true. I would never have let you do that. But don't forget, God has given us two books, the book of special revelation, the book of Scripture, and the book of natural revelation, the book of nature. And both of these are available to us to demonstrate to a hungry world that God exists. And most of our friends do not want to hear from the book of Scripture yet. But here's the beauty of the Christian worldview. The Bible explains and describes the world the way it really is. So when I look in the universe, I can find that all of these things are necessary, and they just so happen. Now look, when I was looking at Scripture in the New Testament, I read about Jesus, okay? And I said, I can believe some things about Jesus, but I cannot believe the miracles, because those things just don't happen. I was a philosophical naturalist. I did not believe in miracles. So I can only go so far with you on this Jesus guy. But then I stopped and I asked myself a question. Okay, wait a minute. I did this investigation of the universe, and I said, man, it seems to me that there are 8 things that have to be described outside the room. In other words, it seems to me that the best explanation for these 8 things is an all-powerful God who creates, who's non-spatial, non-temporal, non-material. He's outside of space, time, and matter, and he's the first cause of everything in the universe. If that's true, if he's outside of space, time, and matter, that means he's extra natural, right? He's not natural. That's what natural is, space, time, and matter. But he's outside of space, time, and matter, so he's at least extra. He's like supranatural. He's like supernatural. You see how close we're getting here? And I thought to myself, well, wait a minute. If there's a God like that that can create everything in the universe from nothing, that means the most amazing miracle in all of Scripture is not in the New Testament, folks. It's Genesis 1. Everything from nothing. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, if the science tells us that there's something out there that created everything from nothing, I'm guessing this is small potato stuff, okay? I'm guessing if you can do this, you can do that. And that, for me, opened the door to Jesus, because I let down my presuppositional bias against miracles. And that's how I got here. Now, I've written some books on this. They're all back there. And we've written a bunch of kids' books also for 8 to 12-year-olds. We have a kids' academy that you guys can take online. So the kids' books just go along chapter by chapter with the adult books. They mirror them, but they are actually investigations for kids to take. And I've got my dog, Bailey, in the last one. I also have my stupid cat in this one, just so you know. Now, for more information on this, I'm going to send you all this stuff by our website. I told you this morning, I have a phone app. That's where you can actually download and ask questions every day on the phone app. I answer those questions. But to get anything you missed tonight and the other 7 pieces of this puzzle, you're going to text the number 66866. You know, I did not create that number. It's got a lot of 6s in it. I didn't make that happen. That's just the way it is. But you're going to text the word detective to 66866. And when you do that, I'm going to send you a link to everything else you need to make this case. Now, what we're going to do right now, because we have a few minutes before we close tonight, I want to open the floor for questions. To me, the question and answer, I mean, I do a lot of college campuses, you know, University of Ohio, Ohio State, Alabama, and the best part is students asking questions. So, you'll take the lead on that.
So, first thing I'd say is go get your kids by 8:30. If you've got kids, we're going to do this for a little while, and then we'll close the session down, and then we'll bring Christy Knuckles up after a little bit. Because I have the mic, I get the first question. Is that all right?
Yeah, good.
So I've been part of ministries in the past, particularly student ministries, that say we should really focus on reaching kids' hearts. Kids today are interested in the mind stuff, the thinking stuff. And so apologetics was cool back in the 70s, but it's not really cool anymore. What's your response to that?
Okay, so this morning I showed the guys that were here this morning, I showed you the surveys about young people who leave the church, who no longer claim a Christian identity by the time they're in college. And I showed you the surveys in the last 10 years when we ask an open question to those students, why are you no longer a Christian? 70% of the responses are issues of intellectual skepticism. Don't believe this stuff anymore. It's like a fairy tale. There's no good reason to believe in God. Evolution explains how we got here. Don't need God in order to explain this, or this. Only 30% of the objections offered by surveys, open-ended surveys to students, are relational. And it's usually they've had a bad experience. They've had a bad experience with a pastor or with a parent maybe who was a little bit too aggressive on whatever it may be, or they saw some hypocrisy in the church they didn't like. And so I think that, and all I do is work with students. So most of my audiences, about half of my audiences, are high schoolers or college students. Because I really believe that's where the work needs to be done. It's in high school, and that's why I take a visual approach to teaching all this material. Because we could very easily just do bullets, and you'd be all asleep in the first 5 minutes, okay? So what we're trying to do is reach young people with truth, because most of their skepticism is what's causing the problem. And that's by their own admission. It's not by my trying to figure out what it is. They're telling us this.
Great. So who's got a question? And by the way, where's it at? Raise your hand higher. Someone's pointing. We're not making statements, okay, guys? We're asking questions.
Now, if you can do this, by the way, when Matt asks for the next question, let it be someone way over on that side.
Yeah.
Then he has to run all, and then wait till he come back over here.
Got it. My question is, how does evolution explain what is?
So they'll say, the skeptic will say, evolution's job is not to explain what is, the origin of anything. That's not part of the evolutionary paradigm. What evolution does is explain how that thing changes over time. So they will argue that this origin of life problem, and they have studies we've been doing for years, since like the 50s, called OOL studies, Origin of Life Studies. We're no closer now. When we discovered the information in DNA, we took a huge step back because it's really hard to explain that. Now, in the book, I talk a lot more about where the problems lie. So there are those questions, the what, when, how, where, why. Those questions. For example, when and where. Where does life originate is a difficult question. There's lots of problems. Is it under the tectonic plates? Is it on mud pools? Is it in the ocean? Is it in primordial soup? Is it in the atmosphere? None of these work, and they all know it. That's why we have so many theories. Now they're saying, well, no, it could have been delivered to us from space. Okay, well, then you just push the problem back one level. How did it get out there? So the problem is all those questions, the what, when, where, down to the who question. I just talked about the who question tonight, okay? So they will say is that, yes, they don't have to deal with the origin of life because evolution never attempted to explain that. But remember, that's a cheat. Because when we're talking about the origin of life, we're really talking about chemical evolution. How do the raw materials evolve into organic life? It is really an evolutionary problem. Let's put it this way. It's a problem for naturalism. Does that make it a faith? Okay, so does evolution become a religion? I'm always careful about that because when I say something, you have to have faith in something, I might just mean that I have to trust based on the limited evidence I have that something is true. And if that's what you mean by faith, well, then everyone does this. But if you mean it's a religion, well, we would say, no, we have more than faith. We have a religion that has certain orthodox practices, certain ceremonial things we come together and do on a regular basis. So when they hear you say, well, your belief in evolution is like a religion, not really, because we don't do all those other things that form religions. Do we have a trust in something for which we have less than complete information? Yes. All of us do, right? I just think that the end of the evidence chain in Christianity, that gap from the end of the evidence to the inference is much smaller than it is under atheism.
Yep.
And that's really the difference.
If you haven't seen Expelled, no intelligence allowed, it was remarkable when Ben Stein got Richard Dawkins to say that life came from space.
Yeah,
Craziness.
yeah.
Who's got a question? Seriously?
Oh, this is good. Just run over there. You need over there faster. See, if you were wearing shoes, you could actually do this.
Question about subjective and objective truth.
Yes.
I really wonder if there is such a thing as objective truth, because somebody makes the decision, and that is a subjective decision.
Okay, but the question is, what is the actual claim? So, for example, if you're saying, we did this morning, remember? This was our test this morning. If there is no objective truth, then the statement that there is no objective truth can also not be objectively true. No, but I'm saying, but it's false. This claim that there is no objective truth is self-defeating, because you'd have to believe there's at least one objective truth, that there is no objective truth. But if there's one objective truth, that there is no objective truth, then there is objective truth. That's the problem. It's self-defeating. Now, what we would say is this. Look, the claim, this defendant killed this woman in 1981. That's the claim. Now, you're going to have to infer, as a jury, make a decision. But there's something did happen in 1981. Either he did it or he didn't. There's an objective claim here. Yes, subjects then evaluate the claims, the objective claims, and they ask the question, which is the most reasonable inference? Well, all you're really saying is that there are subjects in this room that evaluate truth claims. Yes, there are. Everyone evaluates the claims as a subject, but the claims are either subjective or objective. Yes, you as an evaluator. Okay, say that again. I can't hear him.
The claims are made by people, so how can they be objective? They're
Okay,
subjective.
okay. How about this? This is a micro. I'm making the claim. Okay.
Who says it's a microphone?
So if you said, for example, no, it's a spoon. Yeah, of course, a person says it is. All you're doing is identifying that, yes, there are people in the room. That does not change the nature of the claim, though. The claim is based on the object. So in other words, if you said, okay, put it this way. You get in your car tonight. You're in the parking lot. You've got a couple of choices. You can stick that thing and drive, hit the gas, or you can put it in reverse, hit the gas. The R and the D are objective realities about that stick shift. You as a person are still going to evaluate this, but your opinion will not put that car in drive if you put the R on, put it in R. Yes, you as a person will decide if that's an objective or subjective claim, but it does not change that into a subjective claim that you as a subject are making the evaluation.
Next question.
By the way, this is where we're headed as a culture, though, because everything now has been relegated to subjective or cultural decision-making. And that's why I say to you this morning that even math facts, I was reading in the New York Times last week, that even math facts are being challenged as cultural constructs. In other words, they are being challenged as white cultural constructs. If that's true, how will we ever design anything? Yes, humans will evaluate math claims, but the math claims are not a matter of our opinions. They exist. 1 + 1 is equal to 2, whether I'm here to evaluate it or not. Before I was ever here to evaluate it, 1 + 1 = 2. The law of non-contradiction was in place before I was ever born. Before the universe existed, that law was true. Some things are objectively grounded. Go.
What is one of the toughest apologetical concept for you personally that you've had to think through and find a reasonable answer for from a Christian standpoint?
So the toughest, I sometimes look at it in terms of like what are the biggest questions we get on college campuses sometimes reveal what everyone struggles with. To me, once I knew this was true, then I knew that everything probably had to fall. I was missing something if I found something I was struggling with. I wasn't catching it right. I wasn't processing it right. So, for example, if I've got 99 pieces of evidence at the crime scene, and all of those pieces of evidence point to the suspect, right? They're clearly, it's his DNA, it's his fingerprints. But then I find a button over here. It's evidence piece 100. And the button is like, I'm not sure what the heck this is. It might belong to him, it might not. Well, because I have 99 good reasons to believe it's him, I know that button somehow will get explained. And it's not me like ignoring the button. It's me inferring that any outlier has to be evaluated on the basis of the inliers. So I always look at these questions that way. But I will tell you that questions related to the problem of evil are almost always going to be raised at some point. If there's an all-loving, all-powerful God, why does everything stink? Why is the world this way? Why are Christians this way? Why does the God of the Old Testament authorize genocide? Why does the God of the Old Testament approve of and turn a blind eye to slavery? These are the kinds of questions that young people want to know.
Good. Another question?
Now everyone wants to answer those questions. Shouldn't even brought it up.
Well, it's kind of complicated to me, but how do you make someone believe by faith in Jesus? It says here that God's way, life through faith in Christ. Mm-hmm. How does a person get that faith? Is it through evidence or through a parent? Mm-hmm. It says, "Dear Lord, I turn from my own way of trying to earn my way to you, and I now place my trust in your Son Jesus, who died for me and rose from the grave." How do you believe that?
Okay, so how does anyone come to faith? And we had a talk this morning that talked about a forensic faith. How many of you were here who heard that? So there's a lot of you who weren't. So I would say this. From a Christian perspective, it is evidential. How do I know that? Because I've read my New Testament. And for Jesus, it was evidential. Jesus consistently used two forms of evidence to convince his audiences. He used indirect evidence of the miracles, and he would say, if you don't believe what I just told you, at least believe on the evidence of the miracles I worked in front of you. John 10. He did this constantly. That's called indirect evidence. The miracles are called indirect evidence. He also said that John the Baptist testifies about me. Testimony is direct evidence. So he used both direct and indirect evidence, and he did this consistently. Every place he went, before he preached a message, he did what? He healed people. Then on the authority of those healings as evidence, people should know I'm not some just new Joe come with a new story. I've demonstrated to you my deity by way of the miracles. Peter, in the very first sermon ever preached about Jesus in Pentecost, the very first time anyone's ever explained how the gospel is received, he says to the people there, "You guys put him to death. A man attested to you by miracles, by the resurrection." He was pointing back to the evidence of the indirect evidence and saying, hey, why do you think Jesus did that stuff? To attest. If you look at the miracles in the New Testament and the Old Testament, if you had a timeline from Genesis all the way to Revelation, and you just charted on the timeline everywhere a miracle occurs, you are not going to see a consistent set of miracles all the way across the timeline. Instead, you're going to see the miracles bunched up. And there are four major characters, most of them: Moses, Elijah, Elisha, and Jesus. And about 80% are just Moses and Jesus. What's going on there? Well, miracles are the attestation of the authority of the prophet or the authority of the speaker. So God uses miracles, as Peter said at Pentecost, to attest to the deity of Christ. That's evidence. Now, I would say this. Nobody rightly thinks their way into the kingdom because we don't rightly think. Instead, God does something to remove my animosity toward him. And then I'm presented with something. And sometimes the thing we present is just the gospel straight out of Scripture. That's great. Sometimes we present a testimony. That's great too. Sometimes you present the evidence. I'm just suggesting that in Scripture, it's never a testimony. It's never an experience. In the book of Acts, over and over and over again, it's the evidence of the resurrection, which we're going to talk about tomorrow night. So I think we have to be prepared as parents, as Christians in a culture, to be able to describe why the evidence for Christianity is so good. Not that that's going to persuade people, but that God is already calling people. And he's using some message from us. And by the way, a lot of what I'm doing is trying to knock down the barriers that people have constructed between themselves and the gospel. And they've got these doubts and things. They're just excuses. And I want to be able to offer the solution that can lower that so they can hear the gospel message.
Great. One more question. Who's got it? We're going to go. I saw her hand first. You all right with that?
How do you prove that the Bible is God inspired just by God and not just randomly written by just people that don't really matter?
I am so glad you asked that question, because that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. So what we did today is a bunch of stuff that we hardly even talked about Scripture today. What we did is we built a case for truth, a case for making the case, and a case for God's existence. But that case I showed you tonight, you could make that case as a Muslim. That case can prove the existence of Allah, as well as Yahweh. How do we know that the Bible is a reliable Word of God? That's how you become a Christian. So we've only gone halfway today. We haven't answered the most important questions that we need to answer as Christians, which come down to, why should I trust my Bible? And it's going to come down to witness reliability. Why do you trust that those authors in the New Testament are actually writing something that occurred in the first century? Why do you trust that? I could not trust that on faith, blind faith anyway. I needed to know, was there a good reason? I don't think that God is asking us to trust this blindly. If that's the case, the Mormons are equally right about their God. They use all the same words we use, but they've changed all the meanings. And they can do, so far, honestly, if I took you on a trip to Salt Lake City, which I do with students all the time, 8 days in Salt Lake City, on Temple Square, talking to Mormons, they are amazed at how they get spanked by Mormons who know their Bible really well. Much better than we do as a group. They are very articulate, and they are very passionate, and they see you as the lost people group. So if you're going to come to us so we can evangelize you, oh, this is great. They love seeing us coming. And they will talk for hours with us. We go on the campus of BYU in the city of Provo. The highest percentage of return Mormon missionaries anywhere on the planet are in the city of Provo going to BYU. You knock on those doors, 2 knocks, you're in for a 2-hour conversation. They know what that's like to be a door-to-door missionary. We go out there and we are door-to-door Christian missionaries. But if you do that, you'll see there's a difference between these 2 books, the Book of Mormon and the New Testament. And that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow.
Great. Okay, we're going to dismiss, and then Christy
Thank you,
will come
guys.
back. Christy will come back. Yeah. Christy will be back in for a concert. Let's start at 8:55. So clear out. If you want to be part of that and get a little closer, you can. If you want to go grab a snack, you can. If you want to filter out. Have a good night. We'll see you tomorrow, 9:30.